Today we're having Karina Inkster present for us, and she's a wonderful presenter. She's probably one of the top vegan trainers on the west coast of the North American continent. She actually trains people all around the world online, and so she's a really interesting speaker. She operates a fantastic podcast called the No BS Vegan Podcast on iTunes, all these different services. She has just amazing guests, and she's been great in the last couple of months. We've been sponging off her presenter list, and she's been feeding us, this guy would be good, this guy would be good. So next month we have 2 doctors from Newfoundland that are going to be coming in. They're plant-based, and their whole operation is now plant-based. As Sylvan says, she writes recipes. She no longer writes prescriptions, and they actually teach people how to eat the proper way. So that'll be really good for next week. And May we have possibly a really good show coming for May too. So just stay in touch. So without any further delay, I'm going to turn it over to Karina. Karina, how are you today?
I'm good, thanks. Can you guys hear me okay? Are we good with the sound?
Is it too loud, or what do you think? Yeah, okay. So Karina, do you want me to talk to you a bit, or do you want to just start in? What would you like to do?
I can do an intro. I can just get right into it if you guys are cool with that.
That's great. We'll finish off with a Q&A. So anybody has burning questions they want to ask about fitness or nutrition, daily allowances, that type of stuff that you're working out, she can help you. Okay, Karina, thanks very much.
Of course. Thank you for having me. And I'm glad to be back. I was doing a similar thing via Skype. I think it was 2 years ago in 2017 for you guys. So thank you for the invite. So I want to do a little intro of what we're going to cover today, and then do a little background on who the heck this Karina Inkster character is. So first of all, everyone who is alive currently is aging, right? So you don't actually have to be older right now in order to benefit from what we're going to go over today, which is healthy aging related. As we all know, starting earlier in life with a lot of these health habits will set you up for really awesome health later in life. And then on the other side of that, of course, the cliche of it's never too late to start. That is also true. So there's these two things. Start early if you can, but it's also never too late if you want to make some adjustments as you're going along, right? So we're going to talk about a plant-based diet, veganism, long-term within the context of healthy aging. So you guys all know benefits of a vegan diet, but we'll just touch on those just to make sure we're all on the same page about why we are interested in a plant-based diet. Then I have a 5-step approach to improving your plant-based nutrition. So wherever you're at now, I've got 5 steps to go through in order, from the most important to the least important, for how to level up your plant-based nutrition. Then we're going to look at a few key nutrients. So we're going to do a little spotlight on protein, iron, calcium, and B12. So those come up quite a bit when we talk about plant-based nutrition. So we're just going to do a really quick spotlight on those and how our needs for those nutrients change during the life cycle, because it's a little bit different based on where we're at. Then I've got 3 mistakes that I see a lot of vegans making with their nutrition. So we're going to go over those really quickly and how to avoid them, of course. And then the second section is all about strength training. So how it benefits us, especially in later life, and 6 fundamental movement patterns that I would get everybody to include in their strength training program. So you've got kind of a place to start. And then we'll do a quick Q&A. So whatever you want to throw at me, anything and everything, happy to answer. Fitness, nutrition, veganism, random things. It's all good. So you guys know I do nutrition and fitness coaching, and I'm totally online right now. So I've actually been online for the past year, but I started working with clients in person. So I did 7 years of, coaching people in a gym one-on-one. But the past year has been super cool because I get to see veganism expanding pretty much across the globe. Like I've got vegan clients in Dubai and Bermuda and Kuwait and Australia and New Zealand, all across North America. It's pretty cool. And in a lot of cases, these people don't know any other vegans. So they're kind of like at the forefront, so it's been pretty cool actually to see this global movement of plant-based nutrition. It's pretty awesome. So I went vegetarian when I was 11, which was almost 22 years ago. And I went vegan 5 years after that. So I've been vegan 16 years, half my life. It's basically normal. I don't even think about it anymore. But I work with clients who want to make the transition. So they need a little bit of help with going from a non-plant-based diet to a plant-based diet. Or on the other hand, people who are already plant-based, like I've got a client, I'll show you a video of her actually a little later on. She's been vegan for 40 years and she's a coach herself. So people who are already vegan, but they just want to make sure that they've got all their bases covered, right? And I did my master's degree in gerontology. So focusing on health and aging, that's the specialization I did. So my whole approach is helping people to create really long-term habits that they're going to keep for life. So we're not doing crazy 30-day quick fixes. We're not doing like a boot camp kind of thing that you're only going to do for a month and it's so unsustainable that you're then going to quit, right? It's all very long-term. That's my overall approach, is what habits can we create that you're going to keep essentially for the rest of your life. So before we get into the nutrition bits that I have for you, you guys are all here because you know the benefits of a vegan diet already, right? I assume. But just so that we have a little bit of a background and we're keeping the why in mind, like why we are interested in plant-based diets, I've broken the benefits into 4 categories. And I would love for you guys to help me out with this so we're all on the same page about what the benefits are. So what are some of your favorite health-related benefits of a plant-based diet that you know of, or that you've heard of, or that you've experienced yourself? Anyone want to share any tidbits? Health benefits.
Weight loss.
Weight loss, perfect. That's definitely one.
Arthritis.
Arthritis, interesting. So that's something that you've tried for yourself, or is it something that you've heard?
No.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Nice, nice. Perfect. Yeah. So we've got weight loss. We've got lots of different chronic diseases, joint related things like arthritis, also heart disease, prevention, cancer prevention. What about environmental benefits? So that's my second category here.
More sustainable.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so animal agriculture is one of the largest contributors to greenhouse gases, pollution, lots of the major environmental issues that we're experiencing right now. So not supporting all of those things is actually a pretty effective step to making our food system more sustainable. So definitely. The third category I have is ethical. And I know people are coming from all different realms, right? Like I went vegetarian entirely for ethical reasons. But then when I did more research, I realized, oh yeah, there's health benefits, and oh yeah, there's environmental benefits too. So it just kind of expanded from there. But we all know the ethical benefits, right? Like we essentially have a moral obligation to not impose unnecessary suffering on animals. And really the only reason why we eat animal products is because they taste good. We don't need them for our health. There's no biological reason that we need to eat them. And that's pretty much the definition of unnecessary suffering, I would say. And then the last one is athletic. So this is kind of a newer, currently being studied field. So have you guys heard of specifically athletic related benefits of eating plant-based?
Recover faster after a big workout.
That's a main one. Yeah, exactly. So they're still studying this, but the theory is if you're eating a lot of really high antioxidant foods, which is basically plants, right? And you're not eating a lot of pro-inflammatory foods, which are mostly animal products, you may actually be able to recover faster from your training, which means you can then train harder again. It's kind of like what steroids do, except about 300 times more healthy. So yeah, for sure. There's actually pro athletes these days who are going plant-based entirely for athletic performance reasons. So this is kind of a newer area that's being studied, but I think it's a really fascinating one. And I'm hoping that there's more research that's going to happen in this field. So let me go over my 5 steps. And in the handout that's going to be emailed to you, I have notes for you. So I've got the 5 steps. in case you want to reference them later. Later we're going to talk about numbers, like what kind of B12 we need every day, what kind of iron we need every day. All those numbers are in the handout, so don't worry about remembering things. So when I work with my clients and we're working on essentially leveling up their plant-based nutrition, I've got 5 steps to go through. And they're in order of importance. So we start with step 1, which is the most important. Once we have that nailed, we go to step 2, step 3, step 4, etc. Now, step 1 is something we all know. We all know what food quality means. It's basically, let's focus on whole foods. Let's make sure we're getting the vitamins and minerals we need. And it's kind of what we all implicitly know already. Like, yeah, a salad is probably a little healthier than having a Pop-Tart for lunch, you know? Like, yeah, we should probably eat some stir fry instead of Oreos, you know, for dinner. It's stuff we all know, but it's the hardest out of these 5 steps to measure. So for some of the other steps, you can actually track how you're doing, but food quality is just something you kind of have to know. Like, yeah, 80% of the food I'm eating is whole foods, grains, fruits, veggies, legumes, things in their most natural form, right? So all the other steps we're going to go through have the assumption that we've got step 1 covered, which is food quality, which is something I think we all know. So once you're cooking most of your own food, most of your food is whole foods, you can move on to calories. So second step, especially if the goal is weight loss. So someone was mentioning weight loss as a potential benefit for eating a plant-based diet. A lot of people have weight loss as their goal. And if that's your case, calories are your priority. Of course, with the assumption that you've got the food quality covered, right? Now, it's a little bit of an experiment. You got to kind of figure out what range makes sense for you. I would work with someone, dietitian, nutritionist, coach of some kind, who can help you with that. But your total food volume is important if you want to lose weight. If you want to maximize athletic performance, you've got to be eating and fueling a certain amount, right? And for some people who want to gain muscle, also super important because you're going to have to eat more than your maintenance level. So just kind of as an overview, food volume is super important. And something that is specific to the vegan diet, and which is why it can help a lot of people lose weight, is because whole plant-based foods are generally very nutrient dense. You know, they've got lots of vitamins and minerals, but most of the time they're not very calorie dense, which is good for people who are trying to lose weight, right? Because you feel like you're eating all this food, but it's really not a lot of calories, right? If you eat a giant salad the size of your torso, it's not going to be a whole lot of calories unless you're dumping on the oil and, you know, things that are really calorie dense. So for people who are trying to lose weight, that's actually a pretty awesome thing. For people who are not trying to lose weight, people who are very active, people who are trying to gain muscle, it can actually mean losing weight when they don't want to. And it can actually mean having to eat more than you're used to if you're new to the veganism thing. So I've had a ton of clients, guys especially, who are like, oh man, I lost 5 pounds and I didn't want to. That wasn't my plan. And it turns out they're not eating as many calories as they did before, which again is great if you're trying to lose weight, but if not. So people who are super active, athletes, people who are training regularly, it's pretty common for us to feel like eating is our second full-time job. It's basically how it works. You know, if you're eating 3,000 calories a day of plant-based healthy foods, that's a lot of food. It's a lot of food prep, right? Not saying that's a bad thing, but it's something to consider, especially when it comes to being totally plant-based. So food qualities first, then calories, and that's going to be based on your goals. And then once you've got that nailed, the third step is macronutrients. So macronutrients are the nutrients our bodies need in the largest amounts. So carbs, fats, and protein. And of course, again, we're making the assumption that these carbs, fats, and proteins are coming from mostly whole foods, nutrient-dense foods, right? Now, for my clients who are specifically strength training, so I don't work with endurance athletes. Well, that's not true. Sometimes I do, but they're doing strength training with me and the other endurance training with a different coach. But most of my clients are strength training. And so I generally start with half of their calories coming from carbs. And again, these are nutrient dense whole grains, fruits, vegetables, right? So 50% of their calories are coming from carbs. 30% around is coming from healthy fats. So your nuts, seeds, avocados, things like that. And then 20% coming from protein, which is not crazy, right? It's not like the whole cliche of, oh my God, where are you going to get your protein from if you're vegan, right? But it does take some focus. So getting 20% of your calories from protein does take a decent amount of just kind of tracking things loosely and focusing on where that is coming from. Beans, lentils, tofu, tempeh, all those awesome things. So once you've got the macronutrients figured out, the last two steps, they're just a small, tiny little piece of the puzzle. They're not as important as most people think. They're still part of the deal, but they're not as big and not as important as a lot of people think. So step 4 is pre and post workout nutrition. So what are you eating before your workout? What are you eating after to recover? And it's really not that important if your 24-hour period of food is on point. So if you're eating crap all the time, yeah, it's going to be important what you eat before and after your workout. But if your diet is great and you're getting the right calorie range, the right macronutrient range within your day, it's not actually that important what you're eating pre and post training, unless you're training for a really long time, like over an hour and a half, 5 days a week, right? So generally I'll tell my clients to have some carbs and a little bit of protein before working out. I usually do oatmeal with something like hemp hearts, chia seeds, something like that. And then after your workout, you want carbs again, like a banana, piece of fruit, something like that, and a little bit more protein. A lot of people do protein shakes just because it's convenient. You don't have to, but it's easy. So it's not as important as most people think, but it's still part of the picture if you're training regularly. And then the very last step, the least important of all, but still part of the picture, is supplements. So one non-negotiable supplement for vegans is B12. So across the board, if you're totally plant-based, 100% we need to be having a B12 supplement on a regular basis. And then the other supplements, you know what, 99% of them are BS anyways, but there's 2 that are not. One is protein powder that I just mentioned. You don't have to take it, but it's really convenient. That's really the thing that it has going for it. If you're out at work, if you're at the gym, if you're running around all day, yeah, protein shake is a great option. You don't have to do it, but it's really convenient. And then the other one, which I'm not sure is just part of the general knowledge at this point, but creatine. Have you guys heard of creatine as a supplement for vegans? Especially for people who train. It's something that our bodies make. So you don't have to worry about being deficient in it, but vegans don't get creatine from our diets because it's only in animal products. So if you want additional creatine, which is basically like a storage, it's like a battery power pack for our muscles. It's like energy storage, basically. If you want to boost it, if you're really active, creatine can be super, super useful, specifically for vegans, and specifically for vegans who are strength training. So if you're an endurance athlete, it's not going to do a whole lot for you. But if you're strength training, it's going to help you maybe get 1 extra rep if you're doing 10 to 12 reps of something in the gym. So it's not going to make a giant difference. It's not a magic bullet by any means. But there's a ton of research around it. And there's also a ton of research on cognitive benefits, specifically for older people with creatine, whether or not they're training. So I'm thinking that could be especially useful for people who are plant-based, and it prevents cognitive decline and increases cognitive function in people of any age, which is kind of cool. So there's still more research being done on why this is the case. But since it increases our energy store for our muscles, they're thinking it has a similar effect on the brain, which would make sense. So just throwing that out there as an option. I'm not someone who says you gotta take supplements and here's a list of 15 things to take. Definitely not. Just throwing this out there you know, do some research, see what might work for you given your goals. That's pretty much my approach there. So let's do a quick overview of a couple key nutrients. And the first one is everybody's favorite, protein, right? Whenever you tell someone that you're plant-based, everyone's like, oh my God, where are you going to get your protein from? I realize this is not happening as often as it did when I first went vegan 16 years ago, but it still happens, especially when you tell someone that you're active, right? That you go to the gym, they're like, oh, where are you going to get your protein? So I will have these numbers in your handout, so you don't need to remember, you know, the RDAs and numbers and stuff. I have those for you. But I want to point out that the recommended daily allowance that we hear about, you know, when people talk about how much protein we need, you might have heard 0.8 grams of protein per kilo of body weight per day. That's kind of the going, this is how much protein people need. It's similar to the RDAs that we have for stuff like iron and calcium and zinc and that kind of stuff. But the difference is 0.8 grams of protein per kilo of body weight per day is the absolute minimum. So that's the minimum required to prevent health problems and maintain muscle mass, especially as we age, for people who are sedentary. So those are the caveats there, this 0.8 grams thing that you may have heard. It's for people who are not active, and it's the absolute minimum to prevent health problems. So what we need to do is eat more than that, but the question is how much, right? And that depends entirely on your goals. So it's not quite like the RDAs for iron and calcium and all those things where we do have, you know, specific numbers, which we'll go over. But it depends on what you're doing with your activity and our age also, which is kind of interesting. So there's some research that shows we actually need more protein as we age because we're not absorbing as much of it. Thing is, we don't know how much more. So that's currently being studied. So the going knowledge for endurance athletes, so people who are doing cycling, running, cardio-based sports, swimming, that kind of stuff, the protein goes up from 0.8 grams of protein per kilo of body weight. It goes up to 1.3-ish, around 1.3 to 1.5 grams. So it goes up a little bit. And then it goes up even further if you're strength training. So if you're in the gym, if you're resistance training, you could be doing that at home. I've got a lot of clients who do like resistance band exercises or suspension trainers. You see those TRX kind of things hanging from the ceiling. There's tons of stuff you can do for resistance training. But if you're resistance training in some form, you're going to need between 1.8 and 2.1 grams of protein per kilo of body weight per day. So the lower end of that is people who are training, you know, regularly, but not competing. And the higher end, the 2.1-ish, it's generally strength athletes, people who are training like multiple hours a day in strength sports, right? So there's a bit of a range, kind of depends on your goals, but I wanted to throw that out there. And just so you know that the RDA, which is not actually an RDA, but it's the suggestions that we have from dietitians, et cetera. It's the absolute minimum that we need to prevent issues. Now, I've got a couple situations where you really want to make sure that you focus on protein, and it's not all about strength training. So yeah, if you strength train, definitely need to focus on protein, whether you're vegan or not. It doesn't matter what your diet is. If you're strength training, we need protein to rebuild our muscles and to build additional muscles. And if you're losing weight though, if you're currently in a weight loss goal, weight loss is your current plan. If you're in a calorie deficit in order to lose weight, it's actually extra important that we get the protein we need, usually around 20% of our calories. Because when we're in a calorie deficit, which means we're eating less than the energy we use in a day, we don't want to be losing muscle. We just want to be losing fat, right? So when you're in a calorie deficit, you're at the risk of losing both fat and muscle unless your protein is at a certain point. It doesn't have to be super high. It's not, you don't have to stuff yourself with protein 24/7, but it is important specifically for people who are currently wanting to lose weight and are currently in a calorie deficit. And then the other situation is we're older, we're not absorbing quite as much protein as we used to. The only kind of annoying thing is we don't have a number, so I can't tell you how much more. There's still research being done on that. So we can talk more about protein later. If you've got specific questions around that, we can address those in the Q&A. But I want to quickly go over the 3 other vitamins, minerals that we hear about a lot. B12, I've already mentioned. So the B12 RDA is actually the same across the board for all adults. Doesn't change based on gender, doesn't change based on age. It's 2.4 micrograms per day, which is like the tiniest little pinpoint. Micrograms are tiny, but it's very important, super important. It can take years, sometimes decades, for B12 deficiency to show up. And when it does, it is not good. It's nerve-related issues, brain function. You do not want to mess with that. And our bodies excrete extra B12 that they don't need. So there's no risk in taking it. And I would just say across the board, if you're plant-based, yeah, do eat fortified foods like nutritional yeast, and some non-dairy milks have B12 in them. But just as an insurance policy, B12 supplement is a really good idea. Now for iron, there's a couple different numbers here. You're going to have these on your handout, so you don't have to remember them. But the basic idea is that females need more iron than males. So females need 18 milligrams per day up until the age of 51, and then it goes down to 8. And that's for reproductive / menstruating reasons. And then males across the board need 8 milligrams per day. Now, in order to find out where you're at with these things, iron, calcium, B12, it can be useful to track your food. So does anyone here use something like MyFitnessPal? Track their food sometimes? Anyone's done that? Possibly, no? It's a good idea, not as a super long-term thing. Like, who wants to be putting their food into an app for the rest of their life? I don't think that's sustainable or fun, but it can be a really educational tool if you do it for a week, let's say, just to kind of give yourself a baseline. How much iron am I getting every day? How much protein am I getting? Where are my calories at? It can be very useful. And MyFitnessPal is the app that I use for myself and my clients, in case you want to try that out. And tracking your food is actually the only way to tell whether you're getting the calcium you need. So for iron and for B12 that we just talked about, you can go get blood work. So just go to your doctor, say, hey, can I get a nutrition panel blood work done? You can see where you're at with your iron and your B12 with a blood test, but you can't for calcium because it's not hanging out in our blood. So we need to make sure that we're getting enough calcium from our food. And really the only way to tell is tracking your food, and it'll tell you where you're at. So there's different numbers. You'll have them on the handout. It's around 1,000 milligrams a day that we need. It actually goes up to 1,200. So it's a little bit higher for men who are over 71 and women who are over 51. So it goes up a little bit for similar reasons actually to the protein, is because we're not absorbing quite as much at that point. But you'll have those numbers. Basically the point is you can get a blood test, and I would suggest getting your blood checked every year or so. You can get a blood test for iron and B12 and other things too. There's zinc, other things they can check, but you can't for calcium. So really the only way to tell that you're getting enough calcium is to track your food. So quick couple of mistakes that I see a lot of people making with their nutrition, just so that you guys can avoid them. The first one is, especially if you're a new vegan, if you're new to the plant-based world. Actually, who here is like 3 months or less plant-based? Okay, a couple people, awesome. Are there people here who are not yet plant-based but interested? Veg curious? Or are you guys all plant-based already then? Working on it, nice, okay, cool. Well, this will be useful for you then. So I see this a lot. People who are making the transition to being plant-based, what they do is they cut out animal products and they don't replace them with anything. So if you're not replacing the animal products you used to eat with a variety of whole plant-based foods, you're kind of setting yourself up for nutritional deficiencies. So along with something I'll talk about in a second, you want to make sure that you're not just deleting things from your diet, which is not fun anyways. But a lot of people who are starting out, they just cut stuff out and they're not really replacing it with anything, which is not great because it's not really going to improve the variety of food that you're eating, right? So that goes along with my second so-called mistake, which is having a mindset of avoidance. Like, oh, I can't eat that anymore. Oh, I have to avoid this. Very like, got to avoid all these animal foods, which is true. But instead, if you turn it around and you foster a mindset of abundance, like how many awesome plant-based foods can I cram onto my plate? I mean, honestly, I didn't even know what half the foods were that I eat now, even when I was vegetarian, like tempeh and amaranth and wakame and farro, like all these things. I had no idea what they were, even while I was vegetarian. So if you have this mindset of, let me try all these really cool foods I've never had before that happen to be plant-based, and how much awesome plant-based foods, or how many plant-based foods can I cram onto my plate, you are taking care of the mindset piece and you are preventing nutritional deficiencies. And in fact, you're probably increasing your health from where it was before. So those are the two kind of mindset related mistakes that I see a lot. And the third one is neglecting to optimize your food environment. So food environment is a term that I use to describe your surroundings and the habits that you've built that determine what and how you eat. And there's lots of things in this category. So what is stocked in your kitchen? What do you do for social events? Do you go out to eat? That's part of the whole food environment, right? And so what I get a lot of my clients to do is take some time every week, an hour, if that's all they have, 2 hours is perfect, you know, on a Sunday or something, and food prep. So batch cook a bunch of healthy entrees, whatever you can do in the time you have available, just so that you're a step ahead of yourself, right, throughout the week. Honestly, if I don't do my food prep on a Sunday, I'm screwed for the work week. So I have to make sure that I've got things set up. So this is kind of part of the food environment, right? Making sure that you have everything you need in your pantry. We have a rule in our household that there's no treats in the house. So if I want a treat, I have to go out of my way to get one. If it's in the house, I know I'm going to eat it. So the rule is not in the house. So these kind of things, there's a lot more you can do around this, but just basically the idea that there is this environment and it needs to support what you want to do with your fitness also, but especially your nutrition. So let's quickly move on to strength training, which is kind of like the second portion of things we're going to go over. I feel like along with eating whole foods, eating a plant-based diet, regular resistance training is pretty much non-negotiable for your health, for your fitness, for disease prevention. There's all these reasons why strength training in particular is really important. So like I mentioned earlier, resistance workouts usually involve training at a gym. I mean, that's kind of what we all envision when we think about strength training, right? But you can also do body weight exercises. You don't even have to leave your house. You could do resistance band work. You can use a suspension trainer like a TRX. They have them for home use. So I just want to throw this out there. It does not mean that you have to turn into a gym rat and spend hours at the gym if you don't want to. You can train at home. You can train outside. You can use body weight. You don't even need any equipment. So that's kind of the first caveat there. And the reason why strength training is especially important, especially as we get older, is bone density. So cardio is all well and good. It's also important for its own reasons, circulation, heart health, etc. But it's not going to build strong bones. Resistance training is. So what you want to do is make sure that you have the densest, most bulletproof bones possible. So along with your plant-based diet that has enough calcium, vitamin D, etc., you want to strength train regularly. And honestly, strength training is one of the most effective methods we have seen at improving at any age and maintaining bone density. And bone density is super important because it prevents osteoporosis, and it's just kind of overall a functional indicator as we age, right? So there's the bone density piece, super important. And then there's the muscle mass piece. Now, we're not talking about like crazy bodybuilders, you know, let's go on stage in a thong and like just be ripped. That's not what I mean. Muscle mass naturally decreases as we age. And so the most effective way of preventing that is to strength train regularly. Totally cliche, but it really is the so-called fountain of youth. If you want to be mobile, independent, strong, right? Actually, muscle mass in the lower body, so in our legs, of older adults is one of the strongest predictors we have of falls and independence in later life, you know, like 80 plus. So muscle mass is super important, and you're going to improve that or maintain it by doing strength training regularly. Now, little PSA for you here. The scale is not the best way of measuring progress with your fitness or with your physique, especially if you strength train. You guys may have heard 1 pound of muscle takes up a lot less space than 1 pound of fat. A lot of people will say it as 1 pound of fat, or fat weighs less than muscle or something like this. It's not quite the same. I mean, a pound is a pound, right? But 1 pound of muscle takes up about half as much space as 1 pound of fat. So there's quite a difference there. So you could theoretically get smaller, but on the scale, way more, which is exactly what happened to me when I started strength training. Certain measurements, like my waist measurement, went down, but I gained 15 pounds. So if all I was looking at was the scale, I would have been like, what the hell is happening? I gained 15 pounds. So it's not the greatest way of measuring progress. Just as a little PSA there. Oh, excuse me. Got bad allergies today. Okay, so I have some visuals to show you. Just want to see if I can share my screen for a second here. Can you guys see this?
Yeah.
So I'm just demonstrating what I was talking about here. This is my client, Allison. This is only 6 weeks between photos. Now, she lost 3 inches around her waist, and she started strength training for the first time in her life. So she's totally new to strength training, has never done it before. 3 inches around her waist, that's quite significant. That's like at least a dress size, probably too. Now, I showed these photos with her permission, of course, to 2 of my doctor clients. And I asked them to guess how much weight they think Allison lost between these photos. One of them said 20 pounds. One of them said 25 pounds. That's just kind of how it looked to them, also knowing that she lost 3 inches around her waist. Actually, she only weighs 3 pounds less in the right photo than she does in the left photo, because she lost quite a bit of fat, but she also gained muscle. So I just want to demonstrate the scale is not necessarily your friend aspect of things, just so you know. And here's something cool. Check this out. So we've got a 40-year-old triathlete at the top. So they're doing mostly cardio-based sports, right? Cycling, swimming, running. They also strength train, though, in order to excel at those sports. So they're kind of doing cardio and strength. So 40-year-old triathlete versus 74-year-old sedentary person. So this is a cross-section of your thigh muscle. So it's kind of like going directly through the quad. So the little dot, I can't actually see my cursor here. I don't know, it might be moving around your screen. But anyways, the little dot in the middle is your bone. The dark pieces are your muscle, and the white is fat. So it's kind of interesting because the actual size of these legs are the same, but the composition is very different. So check out the bottom image. The white is all fat, and the dark part is muscle because it hasn't been used, right? We're talking about someone who doesn't work out and who isn't active. Now check out what happens when you do train regularly, look at the 70-year-old triathlete at the bottom. How different is that from the 40-year-old triathlete? Not a lot, right? Not a ton. Even the bone looks more solid when you look at the middle part, right? Doesn't actually look that different from the 40-year-old. So it's not necessarily the aging process by itself, although there is some natural progression and some natural muscle we lose over the years. It's mostly not moving. It's mostly not doing cardio, doing strength training that make these really big differences. So I think this is a really cool visual, is because it can show you really inside of that muscle or inside of that leg, the composition of the 70-year-old is not a whole lot different from the 40-year-old, assuming that they're active throughout those decades, right? And speaking of, I have a little video to show you here while I'm sharing my screen. I have a client that I mentioned earlier. She is 62 now, almost 63. And she started working with me when she was 61. She just turned 61. And she's been vegan for 40 years. Can you imagine that? Fully vegan over 4 decades. It's pretty awesome. And what we've been working on is strength training. So bone density, muscle mass, all the things we just talked about. And when we first started, she could do a total of 0 chin-ups. And this is her about a year ago practicing her chin-ups, doing full reps unassisted in her 60s. This is about a year ago, so now she can do 10 in a row without touching a box in between each rep. But I just want to throw this out there that if you're consistent with your strength training, you can make gains at any age. When she started, she was 61. She could do 0 chin-ups, right? So just throwing that out there, you know, it's never too late. I've got a lot of clients who start strength training in their 50s and 60s. So there is a little bit of kick in the butt for you. So let's see where we're at here. You guys have probably heard of the exercise recommendations that the Canadian Society for Exercise Physiology recommends. They say 150 minutes of moderate to vigorous exercise every week. They're kind of like government recommendations. In the US, the government puts out these recommendations. Here, the government used to, but now it's the Society for Exercise Physiology. Anyway, so the recommendation is, if you want to reap all these health benefits of strength training, recommendation is the 150 minutes per week, so 2.5 hours, in 10-minute chunks or more, so you can break it up into a whole bunch of little chunks if you want to. 150 minutes total per week of moderate to vigorous intensity cardio exercise, so whatever increases your heart rate, plus 2 days of strength training that trains all of your major muscle groups at a minimum. And they also say more physical activity provides greater health benefits. So that's the absolute minimum. It's kind of like the protein, where 2 days a week of training all of your major muscle groups. You could do that in half an hour. It doesn't need to take very long. If you've got a program to follow, that's 30 minutes. That's the minimum. So whether that is at the gym, whether that is at home with resistance bands, whether it's a body weight program, twice a week, absolute minimum. Even if you only stay at twice a week, it's still going to give you a lot of health benefits. Bone density, muscle mass, increasing your metabolism, all those awesome things. Now, what I normally recommend is, if you can start with 3 30-minute sessions a week, I think that would be ideal. And then it kind of depends where you want to go. So if you want to do it as just kind of a maintenance thing, 3 half-an-hour sessions per week is perfect. But if you want to get into it further, I do have clients who will expand that, and they'll do 4 days a week. And at that point, you can start breaking things up and train upper body on one day, lower body on the other day, that kind of stuff. But if you're just starting out, I would say 3 half-an-hour strength training sessions per week, ideally on days that are not consecutive, but it's not a big deal if you've got to do them all in a row. And you're working all of your major muscle groups each time. Now, on that note, I have 6 different moves that we all need to include in our strength training programs. And there's different examples of each of these fundamental movement patterns. Can you guys see this?
Yeah.
Okay, perfect. Okay, so these are all from an article I wrote for Alive magazine. I don't know if you guys read Alive, but photos and moves are from that article on like, here are the basic fundamental movement patterns. So one of your most important movement patterns is a squat, and there's tons of variations. What I'm doing here is a goblet squat because I'm kind of holding the weight, you know, at chest level. But there's tons of other options. You can do a squat with a bar on your back. You can do a squat with a kettlebell between your legs. There's tons of options. But the basic movement pattern of a squat is super important, probably the most important lower body training move, especially for what I mentioned earlier, which is the mobility, fall prevention, muscle mass in our lower body as we age. Then we have a hip hinge. And a deadlift is the kind of classic hip hinge example. There's a lot of other options. You could do a one-legged deadlift. You could do a deadlift with dumbbells. It doesn't have to be a bar. But hip hinge is basically focusing on the entire back of your body. So your glutes, your hamstrings, your lower back, your upper back, basically everything you're not looking at when you see yourself in a mirror. Super important. And these are also, yeah. Mm-hmm.
Are those real dumbbells or are those the type they use in Hollywood?
They're real. Why would I use fake dumbbells? They're the Hollywood plates. That's what I call them.
Just wondering.
They are what are called bumper plates. So they're all the same size regardless of weight. So a lot of power lifters and Olympic lifters use them because they're going to be the same diameter, even when they're different weights. But yeah. Okay, then we have a lunge. We all know what a lunge is, but there's tons of variations. Here I'm using kettlebells. You could do walking lunges. You could do lunges to the side. You could do lunges to the front. Basically, the point is that we're splitting our legs and we're working on balance, which is super important, especially as we age. And again, very important for lower body strength. Now we're getting into the upper body stuff. So we have an upper body pushing motion, and there are tons of options. Push-up is the easiest because you don't need any equipment for it. But like a bench press where you're lying on a bench, you've got dumbbells or barbell. Resistance bands, so people who work at home with resistance bands will have it anchored to a door behind them, and then they're doing like a press in front of them. Tons of options, but upper body push is definitely one of the basic movements that you want to include. And then the reverse of that is upper body pull. So this right here is a dumbbell row. Again, if you're working out at home with a resistance band, you can have it anchored to your door and you're kind of pulling it towards you. Anything where you're pulling is very important for posture. So the back muscles, keeping your shoulders in place, that kind of thing. Chin-ups are honestly my #1 favorite move. I'm totally obsessed with them, and it's an upper body pull. So it's another example of using your back postural muscles kind of thing. And the last one is something I don't think people do enough, honestly. It's the simplest, but also the most underrated strength move in existence. It's literally carrying heavy stuff around. So grab some kettlebells, dumbbells, whatever you have, fix your posture, squeeze your shoulder blades together, and take them for a walk. That's literally all it is. But it's really challenging. The goal is to carry around the equivalent of your body weight. So I weigh 125, so my goal is to have about 60 pounds in each hand for a total of about my body weight. And you basically take them for a walk, and you're practicing your posture. You are loading your spine with weight, so bone density, super important. And it's easy to do, very low risk, right? So as long as you're picking them up properly, as long as you're putting them down properly, very low risk of injury. So those you'll have on your handout, just so you can go through. I don't have the photos, but I have examples, like descriptions of example moves, so you can remember. And so if you're building your own strength training program, just make sure you have those 6 moves in your program in some form. So they can be different variations of those 6 moves on your 3 different training days in a week. But the goal is to have all 6 in your program. So let me just show you really quickly before we get into the Q&A. I've got some free resources on my website for you. So this is on the handout as well, but if you go to karinainkster.com, I have a course in case you're interested. It's a 10-day course, How to Go Vegan. I have, this is where things get interesting. I have a 350 item plant-based grocery list. So if anyone ever asks you like, ooh, what do vegans eat? Just show them this list. Here's 350 things I eat. And the whole point is not to print it off and go to the store and buy 350 items. The point is, what on this list have I not tried yet? Let me try some new stuff. It's kind of more of an inspiration thing as opposed to, hey, go and buy these things at the store. I'm sure there are things on here that I haven't eaten yet, even in 16 years of being vegan. Then if you really want to drill down more into the sports nutrition side, there's an ebook on calories and macros specifically on a plant-based diet for people who are active, specifically for people who are strength training. And then I have a fun little thing here. This is new. I actually used to have this as a product, like a deck of cards kind of thing. But it's basically 55 cards that you can print yourself. So you just download the PDF, print them, and it's like a card deck. So you shuffle them, and it's 39 different body weight exercises. So if you want to get into strength training with no equipment, this is your place to start. So just print them off, shuffle them, and you've got 39 different body weight exercises. So every time you do the workout, it's different. And then there's a bunch of little kind of like wild cards that will be a little surprising, make things more interesting. But this is a good place to start if you want to do strength training specifically, and you don't want to go to a gym and you don't have any equipment. That is a good place to start. So I think that's pretty much it for the presentation portion. Thank you so much for your attention, and I'm happy to answer any questions you guys have about strength training, nutrition, anything vegan related. I'm basically here to answer anything you like. Who's got something for me?
So on the issue of anti-inflammatory diet, which is a vegan diet is, but as you get older, there can be cognitive problems or if you have concussion. Do you know about any vegan nutrition that would help or supplements for inflammation in the brain?
That's a good question. I don't. I'm not the expert on neural functioning, brain health, that kind of thing. I would look into creatine actually as not necessarily decreasing inflammation, but for brain function itself. And anything that we are eating that's a whole food. So I'm not talking about like the processed plant-based foods, right? Although they have a time and a place. I'm not into 100% whole foods myself, but mostly. So as long as you're eating the whole foods sources, they're all automatically anti-inflammatory. But I don't specifically know of things that are particular to brain health. That's quite specific. Although a registered dietitian who's familiar with the vegan diet probably would have a better idea. And I can hook you up with some who've been on my podcast. Actually, that was something I was going to mention too. I do have a podcast, The No Bullshit Vegan. There's just so much BS out there, so much pseudoscience, especially in the health world and the vegan world. So when you combine those, there's just so much out there that's not science-based. So I get guests on who are researchers, dietitians, doctors, athletes, all these awesome people. And we're basically just busting myths and providing info that isn't pseudoscience. So I have had a number of PhDs in nutrition, registered dietitians. So if you like, I can hook you up with some of those. I'm sure they would know.
I'll contact you. Thank you.
Yeah.
I just started a workout, working out the last couple of weeks. I have a really, really bad wrist though. They've been like on fire and feeling like they're freezing at the same time. So how does one go about doing training, like even just to use like the cardio machines? I'm having a really hard time because it hurts so bad.
Mm.
So like, is there any advice like like to strength train that maybe I don't have to use my hands so much?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. And you know what? You're not alone. There's a lot of people where wrist issues are actually kind of the missing link, you know? So a couple things. One is, this is what I learned when I broke a finger and could not lift things for 2 months, but still wanted to weight train. So I couldn't do pull-ups for 2 months. But there are things called weightlifting hooks, which sound so weird. And they're usually marketed toward like really hardcore power lifters who are deadlifting like 600 pounds. However, for people with broken fingers, wrist issues, arthritis, whole host of other joint issues, they can be super useful. So it's kind of like a really thick cuff that goes around your wrist. And then there's a hook in your palm that you can then hook around stuff to help. So it's not all just your grip doing the work. It's not going to help with stuff like bench press where you have to push a weight, but it is going to help with like rowing things or holding on to things or doing your lat pull downs. So that's one thing, is I'd look into those. You can get them on Amazon. They're not that bad.
There's something like that, because that was my thought. Well, maybe I could make some hooks or something. So
There is totally, yes, they exist. Just make sure it's not the straps. So there are also what are called weightlifting straps, which also go around your wrist. And then there's like a loop that you loop around a bar. You don't want that because that puts all the pressure on your wrist, which is exactly what you don't want. Right? So you want to make sure that it's got like a plastic or metal hook in there. The other option I was thinking is kind of inventing your own strength routine based on resistance band training. Because there's a ton of really challenging moves you could do where you don't even really need to grip it that much. You can just have like the foam handle here, and then you're doing like chest presses and overhead presses and stuff. So I think those two things combined, the hooks potentially, and it doesn't have to be weights, which are not always the best option for people who have wrist issues.
Okay, perfect.
I'm just curious about the use of oils, because it seems to be an area where there's, depending on who you're listening to, they're either good people or bad people, or don't use this, or don't use that. And so I don't use them in my salad dressings, but then you'll hear people say, well, no, extra virgin olive oil is really good. Coconut oil is really good. And so it's very confusing because it depends on who you listen to.
It is very confusing. And I know for a fact that your next set of speakers are very anti-oil. So they will give you the reasoning behind not consuming oil at all. However, they are doctors who work with people who have chronic diseases. And I think in that case, it kind of makes sense. So if you have someone who has heart disease, if you have diabetes and you need to lose weight ASAP for health reasons, yeah, I think it makes sense to cut out all oils. However, if you're someone who is overall very healthy, especially someone who is active, maybe even someone who needs a crap load of calories, like, I'm doing about 3,000-ish, I don't see an issue with it unless you're guzzling the stuff and getting all of your fat for the day from oils, right? But a little teaspoon here and there, I don't have a problem with it. But there are probably very specific situations in which it makes sense to not have oil if you've got a chronic condition or something. So for people who don't have chronic conditions, I honestly think the research is not in existence yet. The research that tells us nobody should eat oil ever at all. I don't think it's substantial enough, but perhaps for people who have chronic diseases, it is. But you'll hear more about that actually with the Raya Pudis, who are going to do a presentation for you. So they're not into the oil at all. So you'll hear their side. I'm more into the strength training, performance, being active, not working with people who have chronic conditions. So as long as you're not getting all of your calories from oil, you're good.
Okay, thank you.
Anybody else? What about cardio and cardio machines? What would work for people with, say, joint pain, like knees and stuff? What would you recommend as a machine alternative for taking the stress off joints and stuff?
That's a good question. Honestly, I don't run at all because I have back issues. I have scoliosis and my back just does not like the impact a lot. So all the cardio I do, except for jumping rope, which my back for some reason is totally cool with, all the cardio I do is swimming. So I know that's not a machine, but if you can get into the pool, if you can swim, it's actually really good for your joints. It takes the pressure off your joints. If you have back issues, it helps with that. And the bonus is it's a full body workout. So if you're sitting on a bike, you're not using your arms, right? If you're on a treadmill, incline walking, you're not using your upper body, but if you're swimming, you are. So anyways, throwing that out there, swimming is a great option. But for the machines, I would say the rowing machine is my first option, because you are using your full body, you're using your arms, you're doing a lot of this kind of stuff, and you're also using your legs, and there's zero impact. So you're not actually like hitting fake pavement, you know, like you would in a treadmill. The other option would be the elliptical, where you're standing on pads and you're not actually like stepping on anything, you're just moving the pads around. So I would say swimming if you can, if that fits into your schedule, rower as my second choice, and elliptical as third choice.
Great, thanks.
Any other questions? Mm-hmm.
Question about my daughter. She's been vegan for probably about 5 years, really into aerobic as well as strength training, but she struggles with immune. It seems like she's always picking up whatever is floating around. Is there some way, something that she might be missing, or some way to boost her immune system so she's not getting everything?
That's a good question. Does she get regular blood work? Does she know where her nutrient levels are at?
Yeah, she's on top of this, or struggling. I mean, not a lot of practitioners do know that vegan aspect of things. She's in Europe, she's in England, but yeah, but I'm a nurse, so I'm always bugging her, what's your iron? And
Oh, good. Excellent.
all that sort of stuff. She knows what her thyroid is, all those obvious things. I tell her to wash her hands all the time too, but you know.
Yeah, totally. No, you know what? I know that there are some things that can effectively decrease inflammation. So going back to the other question about inflammation, you know, things like ginger, turmeric, things that we know have been shown to decrease inflammation. But I think it also depends on what she's exposed to, right? Like how many people does she see in a day? Is she at home? Is she going around, you know? I think a lot of people do regularly come down with stuff, but we're just more likely to notice it a lot of times if they're vegan, being like, I wonder if it's diet related. So I know a lot of people who are not vegan who get sick all the time. Nobody seems to care, right? But overall, I don't actually know of anything she could be doing other than making sure she's got all of her blood work and her iron levels and all that done, right? Anti-inflammatory foods. And also presumably eating mostly whole foods. That's the other part, is making sure that the nutrients she is getting are coming from, you know, 80% whole foods, right? Yeah.
I'll let her know that, and that you told her to wash her hands a lot.
Yes, please do. By all means.
Hi, I have a question. My daughter is Dominica. You probably know her. She broke her ankle really badly 15 months ago, and she's vegan, and she's been working out quite heavily. But her bone has not fused at all, or the muscles. There's like a 1/4 inch gap still. And I'm thinking, what was she missing? Because she was, you know, she eats, I mean, her salads, as you say, are huge like this. But I think it's the protein. And she makes the seitan and all that stuff. And she's a bit like me. I'm allergic to, I found out because she got us on vegan kick, although I'm not, I was on it for quite a while, and I've sort of snuck in the meat a couple of times. But if you're allergic to soya, it's in the tempeh and in the tofu, and I can't take nutritional yeast, no way, shape or form. It's very hard to find alternatives that are tasty that you can actually, you know, replace it with.
Yeah, so I mean, I know Dominica because I worked with her, so I could see what she was eating. And just so everybody knows kind of the deal, she was working in really remote mine sites as a nurse. So she was basically at the mercy of what they had available in the cafeteria, and the small amount of food that she was allowed to bring, She was very weight restricted because she was taking a tiny little plane in there. So unfortunately, I think you're onto something with the protein, because for a long time, she was only getting about 10% of her calories from protein, even with supplementing, because all they had for her there was like fruit and some iceberg lettuce and maybe some oatmeal if she was lucky, you know, like it was not the greatest food situation.
She wasn't there all year though.
No, that's true. That's true. Yeah. And she's now in a much better situation. It sounds like she actually just emailed me, I think 2 days ago. So it sounds a lot better now. But yeah, I mean, I'm someone who has a ton of allergies too. So I get the soy thing. I'm actually allergic to every nut except for peanuts and all raw fruits and corn and raw carrots. So as a vegan, it's kind of interesting. But yeah, so what she was doing with the seitan was perfect because it's not soy based and it's really, really high in protein, like 75% protein. Yeah. Yeah. The other piece is also perhaps calcium. I'm not sure if she was tracking that and vitamin D, but I would think so, given, you know, she's in the healthcare field, she knows the drill. So yeah, it's a bit hard to say. I mean, it wasn't the whole year that she was in that food situation, but when she was there, I was like, oh man, if there was just more like protein options.
I know. That's the hardest thing I struggle with, is trying to make tasty meals, because sometimes I've tasted these recipes and they're pretty bland. There's some that are really good, but it's a real hit and miss sort of thing. So I think it's just perseverance, I suppose.
It is, and it's experimenting, and like any diet change, you kind of just have to figure out what works for you, right? Go through a whole bunch of recipes. Nope, that doesn't work. Yep, that works. Don't like that, you know, pretty much, yeah.
I also hear GABA is really good for helping you heal your muscles and that kind of stuff. And I was also told that mushrooms have about 52 grams of protein in them.
Yeah.
Mushrooms, interesting. I have not come across mushrooms that have that much protein.
They were doing some research that I just happened to see, and they said that it's got like tons of protein in it. So.
Well, here's something. You know how you hear a lot of times that broccoli has more protein in it than steak?
Yes.
That is true in some cases, except you got to eat a shitload of broccoli to get the protein you need. Like, seriously, if you want to get 40 grams of protein from broccoli, you need to eat like this much broccoli, and nobody's going to do that, right? Because it's really not that caloric. So calorie for calorie, sure, maybe broccoli, maybe mushrooms too, have more protein than animal-based foods. But to get like, I need 120 grams of protein a day. If I eat mushrooms, I need to eat probably this room worth of mushrooms to get 100 grams of protein, right? So I'm not saying don't eat those foods. I'm just saying there's a little bit of math involved in figuring out, well, okay, that's cool. So they have those things, but how many grams am I actually getting, right? So don't eat broccoli as a protein source, which I think Dominica was actually doing for a while. She's like, well, it has protein. I'm like, yeah, 3 grams maybe. It's not giving you that much.
So Karina, somebody getting into resistance training, how do you introduce them to that? And if somebody came to you as a brand new client and has never done any resistance training, how do you work with them in the first month and introduce them to it so that they're not a crippled up, folded over person that can't move and complain, and then they quit? So you must sort of leverage them in little by little. Do you? Can you explain? Like, because I know a lot of people, if they hear you, they might go out and go to the gym tomorrow, and they'll do
And then
like,
they'll hate you the
and
next
then
day.
they'll hate you for the next 3 weeks. She's crazy.
Yeah, you'll have like the T-Rex arms, you know, after arm day, you're like, oh my God, I can't use my arms. Yeah, no, that's a great question, actually. So it depends on where someone wants to train. So if they're going to be going to the gym, that's kind of one whole set of workouts there. If they're going to be working out at home, then I make sure they've got their resistance bands and they have all the stuff that they need. But the overall approach is what I mentioned earlier, which is half an hour, 3 days a week, training all of your major muscle groups. That's not enough for most people to get to a point where you can't walk upstairs the next day or can't use your arm. You know, it's a good place to start because you're not crippling yourself in the process, which is not the point. The point is to bulletproof yourself, right? And be more functional and stronger. So I would say 30 minutes, 3 days a week, something like Monday, Wednesday, Friday, Tuesday, Thursday, Saturday, you know, ideally with a day in between. And what helps is having a program to follow. So you're not going into the gym or your workout area in your living room, whatever the case may be, being like, okay, so what do I feel like doing today? Maybe some of this, maybe some of this. Having a plan, step 1, step 2, here's how many reps you do, here's how it looks, here's, you know, basically your whole workout laid out. That's why I have a coach, honestly. First of all, because I think it's important that coaches have coaches. Second, I don't need to waste mental energy creating my own workout programming. And third, I don't have to second guess myself. Like, okay, what am I going to do today? What makes sense? You know, she knows my goals. She's programming for me. So having a plan really helps. And what I normally tell my clients who are just starting out is you want to be operating at about a 7 out of 10 on the perceived exertion scale. So if 1 is sitting on your ass on the couch doing nothing, and 10 is, holy crap, dying, like max effort, you want to be at about 7, which is still some work, right? You're not just like, you know, chatting, doing some reps, you're working, but it's also not to the point where you are potentially using incorrect form, where you're potentially going to be super sore for the next week. I feel like that's kind of a sustainable middle ground. And as you progress with your strength, that 7 out of 10 is going to mean different things. So if you're just starting out, 8 pounds for 5 reps on a overhead press, let's say, that might be a 7 out of 10. A month later, you're going to need to do heavier weights and more reps in order to get that same 7 out of 10 feeling, right? Like for a professional athlete, a 7 out of 10 probably means sprinting 400 meters nonstop or something, right? So it's kind of a good way of being able to tell that you're working at a level that's going to get you results, but isn't going to cripple you for the next 2 weeks. So there's a lot of different pieces. There's the intensity, there's the having a plan, and along with that goes checking form, right? So my clients are sending me little clips of their moves, like, hey, here's my squat, how does it look? Here's my deadlift, how does this look? So I'm checking their form to make sure that they're actually doing moves correctly. I'm sending back my own videos. I've got a little garage gym that I do videos in. So there's a lot of different parts, but basically half an hour, 3 days a week, having a plan, all of your major muscle groups. Pretty good place to start.
And with form, just to go back to form, if somebody did go to a gym, like here at Kamloops, we have the Tournament Capital Center, the Y, and the old places. They all have a variety of machines. Would you say machines might be a way to start instead of using free weights where you're probably never going to nail form if you're on?
Well, you are going to nail form if you have someone helping you. So a lot of my clients are totally new to strength training, and that's how they learn how to do a deadlift, how to do a squat, how to do a bench press, is me analyzing what they're currently doing and then sending them stuff to work on. So when it comes to machines, I don't use machines unless there's a legit reason to do so. So if you've got an injury, if you are doing rehab of some kind. I've got a client who was in a really bad car accident years ago, and there's certain things she can't do, so she uses machines for certain things. I always veer toward free weights because you are not going to train your balance. You're not going to train your stabilizing muscles if you're on a machine. So from the get-go, we need to learn how to squat properly, right? That first image that I had with the goblet squat. We need to learn how to hip hinge, which is a deadlift. We need to learn how to move things through space. And we're not going to do that if all we're doing is machines. So they have a time and a place. I'm not like, it's never an all or nothing thing, right? It's always more complex than just yes or no. So there's certain cases where they can be useful, but overall, if you have a plan, if you have someone making sure you're doing it properly, then 100% of the time, I would veer toward the free weights and the barbells, dumbbells, that kind of stuff, as opposed to the machines.
Great, thank you. Anybody else with questions before we wrap up? Okay, well, Karina, thank you again for taking your time out on a Sunday afternoon, and we really appreciate you. So thanks again, and we'll talk again soon.
Sounds good. Well, thanks so much for having me. It was awesome. Have a good rest of your day.
Thank you.
Yeah. Bye.